Good evening or good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rebellious Research Seminar Series. I'm absolutely delighted. I was really looking forward to this session today with a good colleague of mine, Associate Professor Dr. Dave Payling, who's going to be talking to us about the composition of visual music. So Dave, I'm just gonna pass it to you. If you don't mind introducing yourself before you start your session, we have about an hour of your presentation or so, and then we have about half an hour for Q&A. So very, very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I will introduce myself. Can I just get my slides shared before I go
Absolutely.
any further? So have you got my slides?
Yeah, looks great.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it like this with the side view open because I'll be switching between different apps. And it just, I don't know, I've got familiar with this way of working, so hopefully that's okay. Yeah, so thanks to Agatha for inviting me to this Rebellious Research Seminar, a well-established seminar series, and well done on maintaining it and putting this together because I know how challenging this kind of thing can be. So keep it up. Everybody looks forward to this, I'm sure. I'll give an overview of the presentation before introducing myself, actually. So these are the four main areas that I'll be discussing today. A little bit of a context about me in general, then introduce some creative projects, and then a little bit of theory and how that applies to the work I've been doing, and then bring it up to date about a collaborative project I'm working on with an academic from the Open University. So these are the kind of four key areas that I'll be working with. So yeah, myself, I came into academia from a popular music background, playing in local bands in Sheffield. Actually, I'm originally from Sheffield. And that was since my teens. And then I adopted early computer music production systems like Cubase on a PC, so the earliest iterations of Cubase. And then gradually developed an interest in electronic dance music. This eventually led to being part of the editorial team for Dance Cult, the Journal of Electronic Dance Music Culture in 2016. Okay, so this early industrial experience matched very well with the demands of the early music technology courses offered at Staffordshire University at the time. So since 2001, I've been an academic here at Staffordshire University, teaching and researching mostly electronic music and then onto visual music. These interests originate from that experience in popular music as a performing musician, but quite early on, I did develop an interest in visual accompaniment to live performance. After completing my PhD in 2014, I continued to compose visual music and recently had a book published through Routledge. I'll say a bit more about this in a bit, discussing my own practice and techniques used in production of the artworks. And aside from this, I also co-manage the annual Noise Flow Festival based in Stoke-on-Trent. But last year it was actually held in Lisbon. That was the first international version of Noise Flow, and that went really well. So the focus of my creative work revolves around sound, music, and visual arts. And in terms of visual arts, it's primarily moving images, either using video footage or animated techniques and motion graphics. And there's been a gradual drift from me being a musician on the left side here towards becoming what Gibson describes as a visualist. And I've kind of oscillated between these a little bit. The music involved in my productions is primarily electronic in style and experimental, and it borrows techniques and theories from the electroacoustic music tradition. Visually, I use abstract animation more recently, and also what can be termed as video concrete, the visual equivalent of music concrete. And this is achieved by using real-world footage that is manipulated to abstraction. Like I say, though, recent work is primarily focused on abstract animation, motion graphics techniques using an application called Touch Designer. And also starting from a very technically orientated approach at the start of my PhD, developing apps for sonification and auditory display, which again, I'll say more about in a bit. I moved towards what I describe as artist-led techniques, working with materials in sound and video workstations to create compositions. And more recently, I moved into real-time performance. Okay. Routledge recently published this noise floor edited collection of contributions from those that have attended previous noise floor events. The book itself was produced by Mark Estebero, a colleague here at Staffs, myself, and David Cotter, who is an academic and musician from Cambridge University. The main reason for including it here is to provide context for my visual music research, and listed here are a selection of chapter titles and authors from the book, which highlight the fact that experimental music in academia is very much the home of the theoretical and the abstract. So that might give you an idea of where we're going. And the use of visuals alongside this is the further niche within a niche. So why is visual music, which includes images, moving images, included as a practice alongside music disciplines? And the reason is there's a small but enthusiastic network of audiovisual academics and practitioners that have moved into the use of visuals from a music and sonic arts background. Artists and academics such as Brett Batty, Maura McDonnell, Joe Hyde, João Pedro Oliveira, Tim Howell, and others. And how did I arrive here personally? Well, an interest in visual accompaniment, as I mentioned, to music, particularly in performance, was developed during my formative experience playing with a band. In particular, a friend from a local band in Sheffield called Clock DVA helped me develop visuals that were recorded to VHS tape. And then these were played on TV screens mounted either side of the speaker stacks, either side of the performing band, which was quite precarious at times. Becoming a lecturer inspired me to find ways to incorporate these interests into an academic pursuit and then eventually onto a PhD project. At that time, I discovered academics and conferences in the field that were a good match to my own interests. And this actually originated mostly from the reading of journals, particularly the Computer Music Journal. The 2009 winter edition had a full issue on audiovisual composition. And that was the catalyst, really, that inspired me to undertake that as a more academic pursuit, I suppose, at that point in time. So visual music, I think it's useful, maybe important to start with a little bit of context and terminology around the subject. So visual music, essentially an art form which often uses abstract imagery, although it doesn't have to. And this is alongside what I'm going to call synergistic sound. It seeks to achieve audio-visual cohesion and includes a visual medium that possesses musical aesthetics. So the key components of that sentence are the audio-visual cohesion, where the sound and image appear to be intrinsically connected, and the visual medium with musical aesthetics, which derives from the origin of the visual music genre. So being an art form, the perception of either of those is entirely subjective and down to the observer. But visual music as an art form has origins at the Bauhaus school in Germany and later became associated with European and American experimental animators. In an attempt to position visual music as a contemporary practice, my preference is to use the term electronic visual music. The majority of contemporary productions use electronic and digital means of production, and the electronic tag also aligns with experimental genres of electronic music. So to me, it fits nicely, and it has a contemporary slant to it. Some of the names classically associated with the visual music genre, at least from a Western perspective, are listed here. Names such as Castell, Bishop, Brutman, Kandinsky, Clay, Fischinger, and so on. These are the people and artworks that you'll come across from those people if you do a bit of research in this subject. So a recurring topic that arises during a lot of discussions on audiovisual practice is the one of synesthesia. Synesthesia being the neurological phenomenon where stimulation of one sensory modality automatically triggers a perception in a second modality in the absence of any direct stimulation to this second modality. Coloured hearing, for example. And this is only a loose influence, as synesthesia can be experienced in many ways, and no two synesthetes have matching associations. It does, however, align with one intention of contemporary visual music, that there's an intrinsic link between sound and image. Material transference and compositional thinking are two key strategies proposed by Joe Hyde, who I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And these can be used when approaching visual music practice, and they are aimed at achieving audio-visual cohesion. So material transference transfer qualities from one medium to the other. And this can be achieved by a technical mapping type process. For example, aligning coloured hues to musical pitch, common in colour organs. And you can see the chart there that some people have used. And then compositional thinking is a more generalized approach where musical qualities such as macrostructural form are taken from the musical composition, and then that form is applied to the visual temporal structure. Microstructural properties such as gesture and texture can also become a metaphorical source for compositional thinking. More on this later. So before getting into the more theoretical approaches, I'm going to introduce a few of my projects to show the range of processes I've used and results they achieved. And they go from algorithmic generative media to fixed media composition, and then on to real-time performance. So before and during the early stages of my PhD, my approach to working with audiovisual media was very technological influenced. And at this stage, what I'm going to term as algorithmic in nature. This stemmed from an interest both in music technologies and a discipline known as sonification. I developed a system that could automatically convert images to sound, and the intent was to create something musical, whatever that means in this case, that stood out from similar systems. And so there are some other systems that do a similar thing, one being the voice system by Maya, and there's a software application called Virtual ANS, which both allow you to load images and convert it to sound, but they both have a kind of synthetic quality to the sound they produce. And my idea was to try and make something that was a bit more interesting, I suppose. In Hue Music, this application that you can see on the screen, pre-recorded samples of timbres were associated with different colors. The intention wasn't to produce a literal translation from image to sound, but more a process of exploring what could be achieved more musically, and through this mapping process. So this paper, creating timbre soundscapes from colored images, was presented at ICAD in 2007. So you see the image top left here. It's analyzed as shown in this histogram just below here. So this is quantized into 8 U values, and hopefully you can see there's a predominance of black and the cyan colors. Each of those has an associated timbre. So if this was played, if you could hear this, you would hear mostly the black mixed with the cyan timbre. And that would change as the other colors came in. So you get more of a mix of different sounds. And then I developed it so you could interact using this little interface below. So you can move it around and the color values would change. So it became more of a generative app. And yeah, it kind of worked. It was a little bit repetitive after a while. So I included the option to load different sound banks to make it more flexible. But that kind of went onto the back burner fairly quickly. However, you can actually download this software if anybody's interested. There's that link on the screen. And if anybody does that and has any issues, please let me know. Because I have had issues sharing it and it not being accessible. But I think, fingers crossed, that one should work. So slightly later in my PhD, the two compositions I'm going to play excerpts from are from my PhD portfolio. And they both use film footage. But the second one, known as diffraction, title diffraction, was one of the earliest pieces where I started to use animation. And that was a point in time that marked the shift towards the use of animation, particularly abstract animation. And coming from an electroacoustic music approach, I can see there was a tendency to overuse visual filters in a similar way to how found sounds in music are heavily treated to create surrogacy from their original source in music concrete. And on reflection, I think the soundtracks for both these pieces feel more developed than the visual component. But they're kind of okay, and they have been played at several conferences and small film festivals. So I'll just play a couple of clips from these, and do let me know if you get no sound. We did try this, and it seemed to work. I'm just going to play short clips from these.
We don't seem to hear the sound, I'm afraid, Dave. I know we tried it, but I can't.
No sound.
No.
Okay. Do I try again or persist? Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly play short clips of these. So that was Theravada Colour Morph, inspired by a visit to Thailand, unsurprisingly. And this is called Diffraction, which is the piece where I start to use animated techniques in conjunction with film footage. So yeah, so this part was created in an application called Touch Designer, and these are the first kind of evidence of me using animated techniques. just go on a little bit. Yeah, so both those, the soundtracks are examples of the electroacoustic type music genre, and the visuals are what I thought at the time was the visual equivalent. So inspired by my supervisor at the time, Tim Howell, I'm currently labeling these as electroacoustic movies, as did Tim. Okay. So the work involved in creating the visuals for this project, Heatwork, was my first attempt at live visuals. These were created as a visual backdrop to a live musical performance. Heatwork was funded by the Arts Council England, and it was a project conceived by my colleague, Mark Estebeiro. I'm not sure if he's here. He said he might be able to come along. And it was a reflection on the historical heritage of the local potteries industry in Stoke, which has gone through a decline, but it's currently seen a resurgence, I would say, in the form of high-quality, smaller craft potteries. Heatwork premiered just before the pandemic in 2019. The project involves several partners, including those listed here. The BCB Festival was a broad umbrella under which the main Heatwork performance took place at Middleport Pottery. Staffordshire Film Archive supplied a lot of useful archive footage and advice, and the footage was of people working in the local potteries. Musically, we had a full brass band accompanied by electronic sound processing from Mark and improvised bass clarinet from Matthias Muller, who used his own bespoke Sabre system electronic device, which is attached to his bass clarinet. The primary event was at the 2019 Christmas light switch on at Middleport Pottery, and this was followed up by a smaller version, minus a brass band, which took place at Saberfest at the Zurich University of the Arts, which is where Matthias works. And this was literally weeks, could have even been days before the lockdown, so we just about made it back to the UK. And yeah, I've got a couple of short clips of this work. And the video footage here was recorded by a student group, actually, called Muddy Video. I'm not sure if they still exist. So you can't really see my visual accompaniment here, and I'm hiding behind the conductor just there. So we did work on another version of this, which was intended as an installation at Middleport, but that didn't come to fruition because they were locked down for so long. But I'll just play a short clip of this to show you the visuals, and it's also accompanied by Mark's electronic audio processing.
Fired, which is your first filing. Yes. So that would be done by an assembler.
You got to feel you pick a piece of the ware up and you got a feel, and you could feel that it wasn't made in steel.
And then they would go on to the dipping, the glazing, which was generally, again, done by a man.
You couldn't fire that. Yeah, I've openly put it in a brand, pins sticking there. Makes it something unique.
All this beautiful ware, these beautiful things that were coming out of this industrial area.
Makes it something unique.
Generally,
you couldn't fire that, because obviously you couldn't put it in a crank and have pins sticking there.
Everybody got a good sense of humour. You had to have broad shoulders sometimes.
Yeah, apologies for only playing brief clips, but I want to keep on track with time. So yeah, you could hear there's a couple of people that I interviewed for the project, and they are people that work in the local potteries, one at Middleport and the other one is more of a freelance artist. So yeah, I've mentioned electroacoustic music a few times and played a couple of examples, but I wanted to contextualize how it's influenced my approach to my visual practice a little bit more. So electroacoustic music can be broadly categorized as music produced and reproduced with the aid of electronic means. It combines tape-style techniques with electronic and computer music genres. And there's a substantial body of theory around this genre, which I won't get into too much here, except to discuss a couple of aspects that have informed my work. And these are the electroacoustic structuring processes known as gesture and texture. These two concepts can translate between sound and image media and help inform the development and analysis of visual music works. And I've got a few examples that hopefully illustrate this point. So gesture, in electroacoustic terms, and probably more generally music, to be honest, is something that's quite evident in music. So especially in performance, a percussionist, for example, will use physical gestures to strike an instrument, and there's a resultant sound. But in electroacoustic music theory, it can be said a sound itself contains a type of gesture. And there might not be any apparent cause or origin of that being evident. So these characteristics are things that will change over time, such as sound modulations, pitch glides, filter sweeps, sound panning, and so on. These are all sonic gestures that are either already present in the sound or can be produced through some type of processing, and that's a classic thing that occurs with electroacoustic music and music concrete. So similar to this, visual forms can also move and transform in a gestural manner. A shape can twist, rotate, translate, transform, and so on. And these are all equivalent visual gestures which can align to complementary sonic gestures. So here's an example of a piece that I think illustrates this idea. Yeah, so there you see more evidence of the abstraction that I've been talking about. And the whole visual composition in this piece involves various transforming abstract figures. The soundtrack, I would say, is similarly gestural, constructed from synthetic tones which constantly evolve in response to the abstract visual forms. And these reinforce the visual behaviors with the intention of creating a cohesive sound and image experience. This clip also illustrates some of the key production techniques that are used quite frequently in the visuals, and that's using simple geometric forms, circles, polygons, and so on, which are repeated, distorted, and subject to video feedback in this case, creating more complex imagery. So that's audiovisual gesture. Conversely, sonic textures are sounds that are more static in nature. They're pervasive and change in only a gradual manner. They have limited recognizable modulations, except maybe over a more extended period, and the focus really is more on the prevalent textural ambience. Similarly, visual textures inhabit a visual space, don't contain identifiable figures such as those geometric forms, but are mostly colors and pattern type images. So this piece from 2020 illustrates visual and musical texture paired together. And it's actually, this is a real video footage of a sunset, which has been compressed into 11 minutes. And I'm not going to play the whole 11 minutes, just the first bit. Yeah. So yeah, there are some subtle visual gestures like shifting colors and gradients, and there are some auditory gestures as well. But the focus is more on the textural visual surface, which is reinforced by the extended sonic drone textures, which are quite pervasive. And those drones were achieved by stretching audio field recordings, which is a classic tape technique. So a piece of tape that is slowed down to give a time stretching type effect. And the visuals, like I've said, were created from short clips of an actual sunset, which themselves were time stretched and then crossfaded to create a kind of time-lapse effect. I have to give credit at this point to Heather Minchin, actually, who was a previous colleague here at Staff's. She did the original video for this, but I updated it in 2020 from a sunset of my own. Okay, so these two examples isolate gesture and texture as separate, distinct qualities which work together in sound and image, but you can juxtapose them. So gestural sound compare with gestural visual, but there's no rules as such to follow. You can experiment to create whatever works at that point in time with those pieces yet. So this clip is from another piece in 2015, where the music is more textural and the visuals are more gestural. Yeah. Just play a little bit of this. Yeah, just move on a little bit. So yeah, it's straddling the line really between texture and gesture. I think it's kind of a bit slowed down, so it feels textural generally. But I'd say the visuals themselves have more obvious, more overt gestures than the sound. But yeah, that's debatable, obviously. But hopefully they demonstrate this idea of how I've applied techniques from electroacoustic music theory and applied those to visuals. And I found that whether they achieved the intended result, yeah, it's debatable. But I think this idea has been useful in post-analysis of compositions and also communicating ideas around the subject. And they've become a focus of my own research. So since starting working with dance school in 2016, and therefore becoming more involved with written discourse, and after a period of intense composition, it was all about composition for many years, really. My focus shifted a little bit towards writing. Many of the preceding ideas that I've been discussing today are discussed in this article, which was published in the Leonardo Music Journal, which is now discontinued. And this was published in 2019. And this was written in response to me feeling a period of composition had actually come to a conclusion. And it was a useful exercise to consolidate the previous processes in written form. And it also happened to coincide with the REF event. And it just felt a good way to tie that past experience together as a submission to REF. And shortly after this, and after REF 2021, and after reflecting further on previous work, it seemed like an opportunity post-REF to further consolidate my ideas in the form of a book. So it felt like there's a window. If I'm going to write a book, this is the moment, because we've just got through the REF, and there's a little bit of space in terms of timing. Yeah. So yeah, big undertaking, but it did borrow some content from my PhD thesis, but there was a lot of new ground covered there as well. And I'd say this has actually been one of the most useful processes that I've undertaken recently, not because of the results per se, but as other people suggest, the value's in the process, not the result. And I'd say that's very true in this case. It's made me reevaluate and interpret previous ideas that I had in unexpected ways. I now feel I've got a clearer appreciation of audiovisual genre as a subject in general and how my own work fits in that space. So yeah, after several years exploring fixed media composition, and my focus more recently has shifted towards real-time performance and visual music, what I'm calling visual music instrument design. And this will be discussed in this last part of my presentation. So again, I borrowed from musical ideas, musical theory and techniques and research to apply similar principles to visual devices in this case. So digital visual music instruments, the kind of thing I'm working with, follow a similar design topology to digital music instruments. So in simple terms, you have a gestural control device which receives a performative gesture, and this is mapped to relevant sonic or visual parameters. DMIs, musical instruments, have a strong user and research base supported by events such as the NIME conference. Visual instruments, however, are a little less common, but they are found at events such as the International Computer Music Conference, ICMC. So just to break this down a little bit, the gestural control device can be selected from a range of existing hardware controllers or design using touchscreen interfaces. And this is where I'm working currently exclusively with an iPad or other tablet running an application called Open Stage Control. And you can use MIDI or Open Sound Control with this. I do find the touchscreens offer massive flexibility, but you lose that tactility that you get with a real hardware controller. But I think the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. So for the other component, the media generation or the graphics generation, until recently, this was the most favored element of the instrument design. And And similar ideas, really. I was working with imagery created from OpenGL primitives, such as a circle, a torus, a grid. You replicate them, transform, distort, and so on. And you get some interesting results. And I think this instrument that I'm working on can create both gestural and textural type imagery, so it's quite flexible. I also see this as akin to sound synthesis, where you've got very precise control over every detail of the sound and the image as well in this case. To further illustrate this technique of geometric forms, creating more complex imagery, I did work on a small project, which I thought of as frozen moments. So while I've been working on that technique, I thought actually some of the individual frames themselves are really worth taking a look at themselves. So animation and motion graphics lend themselves very well to music accompaniment, as they both have a temporal trajectory, dynamics, and cadence that complement each other. But as I say, I was doing a lot of individual keyframing to get the music to match quite closely to the visuals. And on freeze framing these, I thought, actually, these images are just really nice. Why don't I do something with those themselves? So during the COVID lockdown, the opportunity arose to submit to the SIGGRAPH conference, SIGGRAPH Asia in this case, which was supposed to be held in Seoul, South Korea, but was ultimately held as a virtual event because of the pandemic. So, but I did submit a couple of pieces called Rainbow Tunnel and Arc Diffusion, which were both accepted as digital artworks, which were exhibited online. So this image you can see here and on the next slide were both frozen moments taken from an animated series of frames, but I did a little bit of extra work on the frames themselves because I just really liked the results that were produced. So yeah, coming on to my current practice, I'm working what I call a visual music instrument, working on this under development, and it's called Morphlux or Light Transformer. Okay, so Morphlux is designed in an application called Touch Designer. It's essentially still under development. I do intend to release this at some point. It's used as part of a duo known as Biphase, which is comprised of James Dooley, who goes by the name of Formules, who works at the Open University, and I mentioned him previously, and myself. So it's an ongoing collaboration exploring individual sound and visual instrument design, as well as being a collaborative visual music performance project. In Biphase, James Dooley performs the electronic music, and he has his own bespoke software, which he names Formules, and I perform the visuals with my Morphlux instrument. The current version uses Open Stage Control, the application that I just showed you, for the control input, and Touch Designer for mapping and image generation. And since transferring the gestural control device onto this Open Stage platform, I've become more interested in developing the interactive quality of the instrument. So currently the visual development is a little bit on hold while I work on the interface, but I did actually add some visual stuff very recently as well. So in December 24, we performed a conference called 23 Art, and that number updates each year. This was a conference in Porto, Portugal. And prior to that, we were at the ICMC conference in Limerick. And this short clip was recorded during rehearsal for the 23 Art event in December, and demonstrates some of the ideas that we're working with. Yeah, so that illustrates the kind of thing that we're working on. And you see James has got an equivalent type of device, which is generating the music. He uses two separate touchscreen controllers. His instrument is much more developed than my visual instrument. I've actually been inspired and informed by James's work, and I've translated some of his ideas onto the visual component. So he's been really good person to work with. And actually, if anybody's interested and you are local, we're playing at the local EMON in Stoke tomorrow evening. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that event, the Electronic Music Open Mic, known as Electric Tentacle in Hanley tomorrow evening. So you can catch us there. And the plan actually is to try and play at some more mainstream events and venues like this. It's something that we discussed recently to take our research more into the community and get it more widely seen and experienced. So this brings me right up to date, actually. I'm back full circle to the Noise Flow book, which I introduced right near the beginning. And actually, I have a chapter in that publication, as you can see here, called Music in Vision. And this chapter represents a thorough analysis of my techniques and ideas related to visual music instrument design and the influence of gesture and texture, which I've been discussing as principles for designing and analyzing visuals, a lot of which I've touched on and used today. And again, this has been another useful exercise in refining my ideas related to visual music in general and visual music instrument design. So yeah, last couple of slides, moving on to some conclusions and a little bit of summary. So I was debating whether to actually include information about my written work in this discussion, which is more about practice-based, and in this case, practice-based visual music. But I think writing itself, obviously, is a creative practice, and it's become integral to my work. Yeah. So writing has proved to be an important aspect of my work by consolidating and refining my ideas, and also fostering a deeper understanding of my own work and others' practice. As mentioned, as with many things, the insights reveal themselves through the process of doing the thing rather than when you get to the destination. Yeah. So yeah, I was thinking it has proved useful in reflection and understanding past work, but actually has it improved, informed, and developed my practice moving forward? And I think it has. A few things come to mind. So writing is another tool amongst many that an artist might utilize, and perhaps a clunky analogy, because I'm into running as well, a sports analogy. There's a kind of a form of cross-training maybe for artists. So although running might be a sports person's key discipline, you might support that with some time in the gym or going on the bike, and that can yield benefits. Yeah, so it's something else outside your main discipline that informs or helps the key discipline. And some of the benefits that I've found are originality. So it removes naivety, or in my case, it has, by developing more awareness anyway, of related work, understanding it. And that's helped me to hone my own unique voice. Refinement. Yeah, so it's helped me understand my own techniques a little bit more deeply. And that in turn has led me to refine and develop and improve their use. Yeah, so it's that kind of nuance and that extra 10 or 15% that I've got from writing about the subject. Maybe it seems odd that might be the case. And finally, confidence, I think, by reflecting on and evaluating my own work more deeply, it's alleviated to some extent, it never completely goes away, that nagging doubt about its viability and position within the wider artistic community. Of course, other forms of artistic development don't involve writing, so the composer can continue to compose and produce excellent work. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's essential by any means, but it has proved useful to me. So electronic visual music and audio-visual practice in more general terms is now an established art form incorporating sound and image using digital and electronic techniques. Predominantly abstract art form, which has relevance to related disciplines, and it sits within the umbrella of sonic arts practices, but it's not exclusively aligned to that genre. And my practice has, over time, moved from algorithmic composition, composer-led approaches, and from fixed media to real-time. And where I am currently, the real-time performance approach and instrument design feels like a happy medium in the center of this continuum. And I've also moved from musician to visualist. So I'm currently a visualist, which I'm slightly uneasy with because I'm obviously a musician and I want to do more music. But it's just come to this, I've come to this position where I'm a visualist, but I'm not quite dropping the musician side yet. And yeah, in experimental visual music works, there are a wealth of potential metaphorical relationships between sound and image that you can use to imbue visual materials with musical qualities. And I've used gesture and texture as valuable concepts that have informed the visual development and the development of these visual instrument designs. And they've been guiding strategies for compositions and live performances. So when reflecting on the use of musical theory to inform visual practice, the results of that intermediate material transference can be questioned. Does it really achieve the audio-visual cohesion that we want? And do the visuals speak to me musically? So I feel that these actually are ideals that a visual music artist might strive towards, but not necessarily always achieve. And ultimately, the perception is down to the individual observer. But regardless of this, I think the outcomes of that process can be rewarding and effective. And yeah, what has become evident to me is that using musical theory and aesthetics to inform visual music instrument development, design, composition, and so on, has proved to be a productive and an analytical mechanism, and it's produced some welcome results. And that's me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was absolutely fascinating, I have to say. And I can see that both Carola and Ian are in the today. And I was just thinking about their work when you were talking about yours, because it's such an amazing example. Because obviously we talked so much about, you know, being interdisciplinary in academia, in research, in creative practice. But obviously in your case, it just happened so organically, how you started with music, kind of move towards the kind of creation of the visuals and animation and moving image and film. But when I was watching the examples of your work, and obviously that's not the first time I've seen some of them, they just seem so incredibly inseparable and organically created. Like you cannot separate the two because they really belong together. And it was just so interesting, so fascinating to see. Because I sometimes, when I hear about people talking about how they, you know, are required to think in a kind of interdisciplinary terms, they occasionally, in some cases, it feels just really forced, and it's just so organic and natural in your case. And that's why it made me think about Ian's talk not long ago when Ian was talking about his work, how, you know, fine art leads to moving image as well, and Carola, how she was talking about a kind of almost a creation of a new discipline across two different ones, and how it kind of emerged as a necessity very organically. So I know you talked about it a little bit, but I was just wondering if you could just and you did tell us about the origins and how you were playing in a band, which was so interesting, and kind of the influence of graphics. But what really was the process from a research perspective that led you to the development of the kind of more visual side of your music, and how did you manage to make it so seamless and so incredibly connected? It might be a difficult question to answer, or maybe even impossible.
Do you mean how I got into the idea, or the process itself?
Really both, because obviously in terms of the institution, you still obviously sit within the music department, and that's where you belong institutionally, but obviously your work really bleeds kind of outside of your discipline in this kind of beautiful way. So
yeah, it's been a long, difficult journey, I must say. So the time of my PhD, we're kind of still associated with it. I was in the engineering department, and it was very difficult to convince anybody there because we didn't have much experience in terms of research, especially in music. Sorry, in music, but especially in the kind of stuff I was doing. There was nobody there that could supervise. But gradually became more accepted, I suppose. I think I just wouldn't stop, basically, or shut up about it. And we did have somebody come in. I don't know if she's perhaps still connected to the university somehow, a person called Stella Mills. Professor Stella Mills. She became my supervisor at Staffs, and she was really good actually at taking on this. It wasn't her discipline at all, but she was really helpful and got the PhD going. But yeah, from a personal perspective, it was just this interest really. I was enjoying, like say, playing in the band and having the TV stuck on top of the speakers, and just the way it integrated with the music. At that point in time, I didn't see it as that integrated, to be fair. I just thought it was an enhancement to the musical performance. Then the more I explored it, the more I thought, actually, this can become more of a thing. And when I was talking to people in the audience after the performance, they'd say, actually, those visuals work really well with the music, and they seem to really like it. And yeah, I've just explored ways of how you can make that more of a thing, to that integration, that synergy between sound and image. So thanks for saying that you thought that was actually successful, because it's not always the case, I would say. You can play the same thing to somebody else and they say, actually, no, this should look like this, or that sound doesn't fit quite well. But it is something that I strive to achieve. And yeah, hopefully it's successful.
I'm very surprised to hear that. And maybe this is just telling everyone quite a lot about my current state of mind. But when I was looking at and hearing the music and looking at the visuals, it made me feel very zen and very relaxed.
All right, good.
I don't know if this is because I just desperately needed these days, or whether it was actually your intention. I don't know if I can ask that question. Was it intentional to kind of make your audience feel?
It wasn't actually, but well, maybe the sunset piece. That I would see that as very meditative kind of piece, because if you watch and listen to the whole piece, it's very subtle, very long, elongated, drone type music, and it could actually. I've not got into this, but the intention for that was for it to be like an installation piece, where the light would be in a smallish room or a quiet room.
Yeah,
you'd hear the music, you could go in there and just kind of chill out and relax, and actually the sunset gradually fades out, so it does have a very calming feel. So that is one piece where you're right, I was deliberately going for that kind of thing.
Funny you mentioned that, because my next question was to do about kind of ideal, kind of reception situation for this, because obviously in terms of music, there's so many ways of for you to listen to music. You can obviously just be in a kind of live music situation, which is probably the most impactful one, if you like. But there's so many ways to consume music for us. But when we think about music and visuals together, it's a completely different thing altogether. So it's really interesting to mention, to kind of have it as an installation, which I would love to see it in that kind of context, because obviously, going back to this idea of just some of the pieces being so relaxing, meditative, as you said, and as I, felt them to be, I think it's a really interesting concept to have this kind of really separate space of time where you go to a location of some sort and interact with both elements as a whole, rather than just listening to your music as you do some other things, which is what we do very often when you consume music or any kind of sound. So that's an interesting thing. So would you say that would be the kind of one of the preferred ways for you to present your current work as a video installation?
Yeah, there is that thing with audio visual stuff, is that you have to go to that space to watch it, and usually look at the screen, whereas with sound, it's very pervasive, isn't it? You don't have to be in a fixed location, you can still hear it. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a downside to making it more widely acceptable, more widely available, is that you've got to have the screen there as well as the audio equipment. But the places I normally experience this are things like noise floor, so conference events where there is a good display projector and the lighting is very good at noise floor and other conferences where it's quite dark. You'll go in there, sit in front of a screen with some really good electronic, really good audio equipment, and the experience is a very kind of rich experience that you wouldn't get from sitting in front of a computer. So I think it is best experienced in a dedicated environment like that. And there's that mediatization aspect where you think you're going to watch it on the phone and it's kind of okay and you get the idea, but it's not quite the same as when you're in that kind of.
And, you know, funny enough, I'm one of those weird people who can't even listen to music or anything to do with sound while I'm doing something else. So, you know, I just need complete attention when I listen to.
Yeah. Do you turn down the radio in the car when you're trying to do a complex maneuver? That's something I do.
Two things at the same time. So when for example, if I listen to a podcast of my choice, just to use an example, or I want to listen to music, I do it. I have a dedicated time to just do that, and I don't do anything else. It's not that I listen to music or a podcast while I'm working or doing something else. I cannot do this. I just want to have a complete attention on what I'm listening to. And I know lots of people are capable of listening to something while doing other things. So maybe this is just me. I know there's going to be probably plenty of questions from the audience, but I just wanted to mention one more thing, if that's okay. Your work also made me think about one of our recent really successful PhD students, which you're aware of his work. So Francisco, and I know Carola, who is here today, did his PhD viva, because what he did, even though he comes from a sound background, as you know, and he did his PhD in filmmaking. But what we tasked him with, which was a funded PhD, was to think about documentary filmmaking from the perspective of sound. So he was tasked to look at, kind of change this primacy of visuals, if you like, in documentary filmmaking, and think about describing his story, which in his case was just a neighborhood in London, Peckham, through sound. And he's done an incredible piece of work from my perspective. It was really interesting. And it made me think about, you know, how your work and what Francisco did for his PhD is perhaps, you know, an indication that maybe there is a need for a slightly new discipline, which is not film, it's not music, but it's, you know, visual music I don't know what the word would be. Do you think there's a chance, and again, I'm thinking about Carola's talk recently, do you think there's a possibility at some point in the future for a new discipline to emerge? And this kind of intersection of music, sound, and visuals, but not necessarily film.
Yeah, there are a range of related genres already. So there's visual music, audio-visual composition, video music. I think the one that you're describing is a little bit different, and it's sort of like they feel a bit like subgenres. Like you've got music, but then several subgenres. Quite what that new subgenre is that you're describing, I'm not sure, but there is that space and that tension between those two things that can be applied in different ways, I suppose, and they've all got subtle nuances.
Yeah, sorry, I realized I was muted. Just one last thing, and I think Carola has something to say, because I can see her lovely face here with us now. Just wanted to say that it was just so interesting as you were talking to hear how this amazing quality of research when you start with something, and it just leads you to another thing and another thing and another thing, and this idea of research as discovery and this way of not necessarily knowing, because I presume when you started, you didn't necessarily know you were going to take you to a place where you are at the moment with all the things you've achieved, in the process, and just so interesting how it's just this kind of constant thinking how our practice can lead to yet another thing which we didn't even consider before. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, that definitely applies to what I've gone through, and everything leads to everything else as well. Like you say, I couldn't have gone from position A to my current position without everything that's happened in between there, and they've all kind of informed each other. But new ideas have arisen, and they've taken me in different directions as well.
Really interesting. Right, I'm gonna stop here because I think, overuse my position as the chair of this meetings, and I'm gonna open to questions from the public. Should we just? Do you want to start, Carola? I have a feeling that you have a question and comment.
Yeah, well, not so much a question, but also, just expressing, Dave, because I know your work, but it was just such a good way to track the journey of your work and really understand where, C comes from B, comes from A. And that was a really great insight to having this holistic understanding, time-based understanding of your total work. And I just wanted to point out some of the things which I really loved. I do like this notion of cross-training, what that might mean in the sort of listening / visual space. I think that's such a great metaphor or transference, and of course then to consider, and of course that's what you're doing also in terms of the visual side, using music processes and what they would mean visually. What would cross-training then actually mean if one takes that extra-disciplinary concept and transfers that to audiovisual music or just music. It's just a really, really intriguing thought that just I really liked.
I think you're right. The cross-training comes in many different forms in my work. The writing, I've isolated that as a separate thing, but you're right. There's also that by working on the visuals, that's changed how I've worked in the music as well. So that itself is a separate discipline that's informed the other. And the journey, that's the presentation I put together, that's gradually become more of a thing that's been really useful actually in putting this presentation together. I've seen that I was thinking of different ways how I could structure this, and it wasn't completely chronological, and that was intentional. But it's. I think I've given some previous presentations, because I'm getting on a bit, and I've been researching for quite a while. I kind of forget things that I've done. So I've had to reopen the folder and think, actually, I did that, and that's very relevant in this case. And it has helped me, personally, to think about the journey that I've undertaken.
Yeah, nice.
Very nice indeed, yeah. Are there any questions from the public before I overtake again? Anyone would like to ask? I can see Michael is here, and I can see Tim is here. And I think about your work as well in terms of kind of crossing disciplines and just using different media for what you produce. I don't know if you have any comments. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. If not, I have more questions.
No, the question of what the genre should be called, I think that ties in with what Carola was talking about. Multimedial art or multimodal, whichever you prefer. Not sure of the difference yet. Maybe Carola can explain that to me. But it is big where you've got the two components, the visual and the sonic, and you put them together. They do have this synergy. So you've really got them working together. The difficulty, I guess, is in constructing it to make them fit together. I was interested, Dave, that you and whoever it was who were producing the sound and the video using separate devices, working together on that. How on earth does that work? Are you like predicting each other or what?
with that one, I would say James is driving the proceedings. He's very immersed in what he's doing musically, and you can see he's got 2 touchscreen controllers, and there's multiple pages on that, and he's very focused on what he's doing in the moment. But I'm responding because I don't have to. I can hear what he's doing, and some of the audio output drives my patch as well. I'm responding to how he performs in real time, and we have rehearsed quite a lot as well, so I kind of know the structure and know what's coming, but it does change every time actually. Right. But yeah, I'm working in response to him. The reflection for that comes afterwards, so we'll record it. This is when I'll get feedback from James is after the fact, so record the output and he'll say, actually, yeah, this works really well, I like this, maybe we can change that, and then that comes back and into the performance, and we both maybe update what we're doing a little bit.
Right. Yeah, difficult. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, and that process of constructing the connection between sound and image and trying to get that synergy, it's very laborious and time consuming, editing, keyframing, which is another reason I've gone on to live performance actually, because it's a bit more fun actually than sat at a computer, very precise editing and keyframing all day long.
So on that note, Dave, and I'm sorry if this is a very naive question coming from someone who is, working within different disciplines, but is it always the case that the music drives the images, or do you sometimes have an idea for the visual first?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that I deal with in the book actually. It can work both ways. So you can start with the sound, develop the image, and vice versa. Or I find the way actually to get the most cohesion between sound and image is to do it on a more granular level. So I'll work on a little bit of the video, I'll create the sound to that, then I'll move back to the video, and it gradually builds the structure, and the integration becomes more thorough, I would say, by, like, say, toing and froing between the media.
That is so interesting. So what do you think is the next step? What do you think
For
is going to...
me?
Yeah.
I'm just enjoying the performance at the minute. I want to really get this application up to release standard, do a bit of testing with it. It can be used at live performances, VJ type stuff, and I want to get it out there really to get some user feedback and do more performances, because this is a separate subject I've not touched on, but artificial intelligence is kind of obviously a controversial subject, and it's kind of taken over some of the production processes, but right. I think it can't replicate the live performance, in the room with a bunch of people and a performer, that you can't get a robot or a computer emulating that same experience. So I feel composition at the minute is very much on hold, and I'm really enjoying that kind of live experience for several reasons really.
That's so interesting. I have so many, you just open up so many questions, and I'm aware we only have 10 minutes. Unless someone raised their hands, I'm just going to ask another question, if that's okay. So, are there a lot of people doing similar things to what you're doing? Do you think there's a kind of wider movement? And again, I'm so sorry if this is a very naive question, because obviously I don't have enough background. But is that a new thing, or is it something that has been going on for a very long time? This kind of,
yeah, it's always been a subset for me of music, and like I mentioned, that band called Clock DVA. They were one of the early adopters of visual materials accompanying music and live performance. There's another one, Cabaret Voltaire, actually, another Sheffield band that had a similar kind of approach. But it is very much a niche within a niche as well. A lot of music people don't really like the visual accompaniment because music is so important to them, maybe, right. And the visuals can be distracting. But the other side of it again is there are some pure audio visual people, and they don't really associate themselves with music as such. It's all about the audio visuals, and again, there are visual people, visualists, and so on that deal more exclusively with the visuals.
Right. So we have two questions. So Carola goes first, and then we have Alexander.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on to what Dave just also said, and you already said it to a certain extent, because actually it has something to do with the disciplines or the undisciplining of this practice, and how the history of music has actually created, I guess, forces that work against allowing musicians to feel they could freely use audio visual sides, because there's a sort of culture of music for music's sakes. That's one type of culture. And of course, then there's the other culture, which is much more programmatic or narrative, where it also doesn't fit in. And as you said, you sometimes find audio visualists more in the art and design world or in other disciplines. So it is a really interesting one, because the practitioners, I would assume also from your experience of being in that field, come from possibly different disciplines, and as we saw, possibly also from the filmmaking community, possibly as well. So they can come not only from the music side, but each one will then have their distinct kind of practices. And of course, yours that firmly comes from the music side has characteristics which are then so unique in from what we got today, from the red thread being the music that then interacts with the visual, and there's a feedback loop as well, but the starting point is there, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. My background in music very much has influenced my visual development. And you're right, a film person, a visual person, I think they would have a very different approach to the music, maybe. And the results. Well, whenever I see anything that's more from an artist, visual, original, that's their original discipline, I actually really like the visual stuff more than the stuff I'm doing. So I think, the collaboration is definitely something that I think I need to go back to being a musician and work with a visual person. I'm currently working with a music person, being a visual person, but I need to do it the other way around as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Thank you. Alexander?
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Alex.
Apologies, I missed some of the talk to start with, so you might have covered this already. But when you're doing the live elements of the visuals, are you generating the visuals live on the fly, or are you processing pre-recorded, pre-rendered stuff? And how does the liveness kind of take shape and form, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah. So this current instrument, which I'm calling Morphlux, that is purely generated on the computer in real time. And that's one reason I use these primitive shapes. So the circle, the OpenGL primitives are very easy on the processor. So you can make loads of them and do a lot of processing with them. And the computer keeps up, basically. So it is, all... I don't know if you heard that bit where I said it's a bit like sound synthesis. I'm synthesizing the visuals, processing, manipulating, and hopefully getting some useful results. And that, again, that's that link between music and visuals, is that sound synth. It's also a visual synth.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was wondering that, and the next thing was going to be, does your computer kind of set on fire by the end of like an hour's thing? Because
it's not bad if
it would be.
Yeah, if I unplug the power and run it, then you can see the battery going down. But this Mac is very good, actually, with Touch Designer, and like I say, using that particular rendering technique, I've never had any. There's no dropouts and that kind of thing. It seems fine.
I love it. Thank you. Very practical questions, Alex. Thank you. And Paul.
Right. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Paul. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, really good presentation. Really interesting to see some of the sort of process and the sort of background of development that's gone through with those sort of bits of work. To be honest, my questions actually got answered with some other questions. I was going to ask some of the same ones. So a couple of things probably I'm going to say is, like, if you want a product tester, I'm happy to product test
All right.
from a filmmaker's perspective, because I think that is, I think those different angles in are really interesting. And I've probably come at it from that sort of angle of a lot of sound design in film tends to be very similar to picture editing in film, where you get a shot and you stack it on a timeline and you sort of use that traditional kind of linear editing almost. But a little bit of stuff that I've done on my own thing is sort of reactive sound design. So I think a tool like that in filmmaking could be really interesting if you're trying to create the sort of ambient textures of a film. Think about stuff that's been in cinema recently, things like Dune and those sorts of things. You know, for individual filmmakers, I think a tool like that could be really interesting to have that kind of almost performative sound design in traditional filmmaking.
Right.
So I think features like that could become part of your tool. I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so maybe I would use it more to manipulate real footage rather than synthetic materials, would you say?
I'm thinking, almost in two ways. Is it could almost be the footage could be fixed, and you're sort of using it very much as a sound design tool on fixed footage. But also, it's you could use it as a sort of reactive editing. I think for pacing and things like that, that could be a sort of good way of doing it. You sort of feel the edit a little bit more. Because you used to be hands-on with film editing, but now you're very much click a mouse. There's none of that sort of gestural control in there.
Yeah, that's one thing I've really found with the live stuff is just that it's a more enjoyable process, isn't it? Working in real time with stuff, then I've got to go to that frame, this frame, and it becomes very time consuming and laborious. And there's that lack of instant gratification, I suppose.
Yeah.
That you don't get that you do get with real time, should I say? Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, I'll share this app when I'm a little bit more happy about it. It will be out there.
Excellent, thank you.
Cheers.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul, and it really sounds great. And I think we have time for the final question from Ian.
Hi, Agatha and Dave and everyone. Thanks, Dave. I think it was more of because just thinking a little bit through it, because obviously you're kind of driving that the narrative through the way that you're talking about your projects, and those things about discipline boundaries that are kind of interesting, bemusing, sometimes frustrating. Because I was thinking a little bit about the kind of relationship to sound art in a contemporary art context, and how it's really not connected to sonic art, which is very much connected to a music kind of background. And because my partner works in sound art, and the amount of times that she's very excluded from both contemporary art because they don't really know how to deal with sound. If you Bruce Nauman does it, and everyone all of a sudden knows how to deal with it, but it's a very it's a very difficult medium in a contemporary art context. But equally, when she kind of starts to engage with people that work in sonic arts, some of them, but not all of them, are like, well, we're talking about this in terms of music and composition, and I'm not interested in music and composition. I'm interested in translation. That's what so there's something interesting about, and that was one of the other things I was thinking about. Some of your process is about where translation stroke transformation occurs. And I was thinking about, because you're talking about synergies, and I think that at times it feels like there is an act of translation back and forth between visual and sonic material, which is kind of, it might be interesting to think of in terms of translation. It might not, obviously.
No, I think you're right. It's just another way of framing it, I think, isn't it? There's definitely, I'm translating gestural qualities from sound, if you like, to similar qualities in images. I think that is a translation process, Ian.
And it also just reminds me of all of those kind of late 60s or when the Pink Floyd started out, and they had all of the visuals that were being used to accompany those with lenses and imagery, and then the Grateful Dead did it. There's sort of a convention, isn't there, of that notion of exploring what visual components can do in relationship to sonic components. And I guess those were kind of analog iterations, and obviously you're exploring kind of digital kind of exploration in different ways. But there seems to be like a direct link in some ways, in an interesting way, kind of lineage. Perhaps.
Yeah, I do discuss that a bit in the book, actually, is that historical perspective and how this has originated. It comes from various angles. One of them, as you're describing, liquid light shows.
Yeah.
Which is still a thing, and that's another subgenre. But you're right, it's quite frustrating and difficult to talk to some people because they're very set, and I'm guilty of this myself, actually. I'm a visual music person, and what are you talking about? Because he's not quite or I've not taken that into account, because this is my area of expertise, and I'm very dedicated to that.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference in acknowledging that we all do it to a certain extent, but we acknowledge it. You know, that's the important bit, isn't it? To acknowledge when we're aware that we're kind of, we're putting a barrier there, and that's kind of, why am I doing that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I refer everyone back to Carola's book, where she discusses this kind of question of disciplines and how they work together and across and beyond. And fascinating conversations, really great questions. Thank you so much, Dave, for your time. It was really, really good to hear, you know, about your work, and just such a interesting and inspiring conversation and presentation. So just before we finish, and I do apologize about my dog barking there. There's going to be a slight change for the next seminar, because we have a guest from another continent. We have a guest from Australia. So the next seminar, which is going to be on the last Wednesday of February, is going to actually happen at 9 a.m. to 10:30, which is the first time I decided to do, just to accommodate for the time difference. And just to remind everyone that this seminar series is just one of many, many, many things. Our very, very dynamic research center, C3 at University of Staffordshire does. So I'll hope I will, as soon as our website and blog is back, to link to other activities we do. So thank you very much for everyone who joined us today. I'll make sure this recording is up online as soon as we possibly can, by the end of the week, the latest. Thank you so much, Dave, for your time. Thank you, everyone else who joined. I wish you all a great evening or morning, or whatever time of the day it is for you. And I'll see you all next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Agatha.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
See you
Bye.
soon. Goodbye.